have it out, and I'll start getting it out to people this month, okay, based on the information that you have responded. So it'll be a one-page. If any of you are familiar with our operating eligibility certificate that we give out to our vendors, it'll be very similar, and it will have your market. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to add the vendors on that page or just have your application. That is one of the questions that I have. But once that's finalized, I will get that out to all of you. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing about the markets is that none of the restrictions have really changed. We still do not want sampling to occur at the markets. I have had some markets reach out to me about having mobile vendors or approved vendors that cook or prepare on site. And we are evaluating that. I think the overall feeling is that if it's taken to go, the concern with anything, with any kind of giving food that's ready to eat at the markets or anywhere really, is that people remove their masks and they just start walking through the market eating. And then they forget to put their mask back on. So obviously that is still a concern. That's why sampling is still restricted. As we move further and things start to begin to open up, I'm sure many of you have seen that that is a trend. There are things opening in the city. The health department is allowing more larger events to take place with restrictions. And as that happens, I will keep all of you informed. And I will definitely keep Jen and Ash and Mark and everybody all be on the same team with this. And I'll let everyone know if that should start to change and sampling becomes something that is available, we'll update the guidelines. Okay, but for right now there is an additional document that I added, and it is something that we ask for from all of our vendors for events and other things that we have been regulating in the health department, and it is a COVID plan. Now, I did not introduce this to stress all of you out. Many of you have already submitted your your operation registration form already for the season, okay? But this is something that many of you have reached out to me already, and you already have been doing this. I hear that the markets have been very successful, especially last year. They were an essential service, and I'm really happy to have been part of that. This is just something that many of you are seeing. Many of you are doing, I'm sorry, and I want you to continue doing that. You can reach out to me if you didn't already submit something in writing. We just want to know a little bit more about, do you have signage? Things that all of you are already doing. It would be great to have it in a document. Some of you may have that, some of you may not. And if you do not, then please, I'll work with you directly to get what we would like to have. That is the one new piece for this year that we're asking folks to do. And it's not something that I want you to say, oh my gosh, this is a last minute thing and she's throwing this at me. No, it's not meant to be like that. It's just meant to, we work really well, especially now when people want to do a lot of things and open up our city and use our parks and serve food and have events. We want that too. We really do. We just want it to be done safely, and we want it to be done in a manner that won't elevate won't contribute to the case counts in the city of Philadelphia. And so to do that, the best way that we have figured out so far is to have a COVID plan. So it's pretty basic stuff that I'm sure all of you have considered at your market. And if there are any questions, please feel free. And if you want, again, my email is down there. You can definitely email me. That's a little bit better than calling. I respond a bit more quickly, but you can call as well. And I'm not going to go into all of the requirements or into the guidelines right now, because I believe that most of you have seen it. If you have any specific questions, I think now is the time to ask me. If there's anything that you would like me to touch on or talk about, please, let me know, put it in the chat.
Great, thanks, Dawn. And I did just have a couple of those slides that I was sharing, but I
Yeah.
did share the documents via email with everyone, so you all should have copies of that you could access as well. So I don't see any questions coming through chat. Does anyone want to have any questions that they would like to ask Dawn at this time?
Yeah, I do.
Mhm.
Hi, everyone. Quick question about the certificate. So like for the food trust, for example, we have multi-vendor markets. And I know you said you're not sure whether or not you'll put the vendors on the certificate or not. I don't know if there's a question or a suggestion.
Okay. Please.
But I'm not, for us, it'll be definitely harder on your side to continue to update that throughout
I
the
know.
summer. Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that and keep that in mind.
And actually, thank you, Bria. I think it will be a lot easier if I just put the market name and then just something like approved vendors, and then you have that in an email from me. I think that would work out best. You're right, because some of our markets are smaller, obviously, or there's individual markets that there's only one or two, and that's a lot easier for them to have their vendors on there. But thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Somali that says, does the city have some sign available to use in terms of distancing mask requirements? And the answer is yes. We developed signage that's pretty good last year, that's easily translatable because it's in Word documents, I believe, right, John and Jen? Yeah, so we should send that out. We'll resend that out.
Yeah, I was going to mention that at the end, but yeah, we did create signage specifically for farmers markets last year, and we can send that out again. I don't think it's on our villa.gov website, but we'll send it via email. And
Okay.
you can print out and use however you would like.
You want to, yeah. And then we got, okay, so we'll send out the signage. Megan says, is there guidance? Oh, hi, Jasmine. Jasmine's joining us. Megan says, there guidance about non-food vendors, such as craft or information tables, are they appropriate to include at this point?
So the guidance would be that they would need to wear facial coverings. They would need to follow all of the COVID restrictions or requirements that are in place right now. But they are permitted right now. Again, we don't want a bunch of different people crowding one small area. We want to make sure that barrier is maintained. You know, these folks are still interacting with people. They don't necessarily need a plexiglass barrier, but we do want to make sure that the distance is maintained there. And again, everyone should have facial coverings when they walk into the stall. But no, that is something that we want those vendors to be included now.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Megan, did you have a follow-up question? I think when we were talking about prepared food vendors as well. Are there any limitations to the prepared food vendors, Dawn?
Well, and that's what I mentioned, is that I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page with this. For prepared food vendors, I believe that we initially last year, we did not allow them really to take place unless it was just food to go. And that is still very much the same. The concern is that, you know, if you have someone that's preparing, let's say a wrap or something, and it's there and it's not fully prepackaged and the person just starts eating it right there, we do not want that. That is not permitted at this time. We're not there yet. So if it could be fully to go in a bag and they take it and they go sit somewhere, whether that's in a park away from everyone, that's great. If it's, you know, in their cart, wherever that could be. But the concern is we don't want them eating in the market, and we don't want the market to have to deal with folks or, you know, having to confront people with that. I know that it could be quite confrontational. Ideally for events and things like that, we require seating areas. And so if anybody is serving food, you need to be seated while you're eating. And that is still very much the requirement. So that's why it would have to be to go right now. And I am a little concerned about that at markets, that people just start eating, because many of the markets take place in, parks and things like that. So if there's no seated area, that is a bit of a concern.
And Dawn, there's a follow-up poke here question about prepared versus food trucks. So what if it's a food truck? That's okay, as opposed to prepared food?
So that's the whole thing too. It's the food truck. That's what I was saying. I want to make sure we're on the same page.
Mhm.
And I want to talk to my doctors, essentially my team in the department, and make sure that we're on the same page with this. Because as you see, when you walk around the city of Philadelphia, you will see mobile food vendors. Those folks, we definitely need them open and operating in our city. They've been hard hit as well, and we don't want to restrict them, but the food is to go. You shouldn't be eating it
True.
in front. So if it is fully packaged and to go, I don't think that there's any restrictions. But where I do worry is that if they start eating it at the farmers markets, I know based on the complaints that we get right now from 311, that we will get complaints, and any complaint we are obligated to respond to. So I don't want it to trigger me coming out or staff coming out to your market and then this happening and us citing you for this, because we don't want that happening. So that's the concern. If it's fully to go, then that would be permissible right now. But I do need to vet this out internally a little bit more as well. And I will follow up with all of you.
Maybe Dawn's suggestion from me is that if it's prepared but in an enclosure, maybe that's better than having just like I don't know, a hot dog. Like you're not serving hot dogs, you're serving a hot dog in a box, right?
Right.
That's better.
Well,
okay.
That definitely, and I'm sorry if that wasn't clear, that is definitely what we want. So
Okay.
It would need to be fully enclosed to go in a container.
Okay.
Or something, or wrapped. A container, it doesn't have to be a container. A hot dog could be wrapped.
Okay. But and then just to keep going, this hot dog.
See, there's a million, I know, Ash.
I was
There's
like,
a million ways you can go with this. That's why I'm like, I need backup. I need my doctors.
Yeah. Because I'm wondering too if the farmers markets are different from, let's say, the holiday village that gets set up in Love Park every year, where they're serving like Wiener Schnitzels like live. Like there's so we say, well, no cooking demonstrations. So we're not doing that because we don't want people to be chopping up the food and cooking the food and then serving it, and people are eating it right then and there. So that's still a no.
That's still a no.
Hands down. Okay, good. So I guess we'll just let everybody know once Dawn has more sort of critical, conversations with the doctors, how exactly should people roll out the prepared food?
Yeah.
Okay.
And honestly, I don't know if anyone is doing that right now, or if there are mobile vendors nearby any of your markets, if anyone wants to weigh in. If that is happening. I think it's my understanding that we didn't allow that to happen last year, but I'm not sure if any of you have incorporated that now moving forward. And again, if it's fully prepackaged, fully enclosed, and it's to go, and it's not eaten in your market in front, then that should be okay. I'm going to confirm, and I'll send out an email to everybody. Okay, so we're on the same page.
Thank you, Dawn. That was great.
And I don't know if it's helpful in terms of signage. I don't think the signage we already created was specific to like no eating at market. So if folks are already using that or signage related to that, or you think it would be helpful in terms of dealing with customers, I guess let us know and we can see if there's other signage we could develop that's helpful.
That's good. I think we should. Yeah. I think we should. Yeah.
So we can look into that on our end. Yeah.
Right. And by all means, we're not telling folks you can't eat here. Like, for example, you're in Clark Park and you're like, you can't eat here. It's not like you couldn't go literally over to the dog bowl and eat your thing. It's just you can't eat right in this vicinity because it's just a lot of people here. You can sort of appoint yourself to sit 6 feet away from someone, but you shouldn't eat right in the vicinity of the market.
And the other thing that we do say, which might be helpful in terms of signage, is that you should eat while remain seated. You should eat while seated. So that's what we want folks, you know, to do. If they're eating with their family while seated on a bench, that's better than, you know, walking around the market with. So that is another useful sign to have, like, please eat while seated. And that's what we recommend to, like, many of our bigger events, you know, at the Christmas Village and things like that. There was signage like that.
Oh, very good. Yeah, because Somali also just asked no eating at the market or no eating while walking. So that you just answered that question. That's great. Vince, did I see a hand go up by any chance? Did you have a question? Okay, cool.
I had a question specific to the COVID plan, Dawn, for each of the markets. And sorry, maybe you said this, but so if an organization operates multiple markets, do you need a separate plan for each individual market, or it can be one plan for all markets?
I'm comfortable with it being one plan for all markets.
Okay.
Okay, so if you have a few different markets, and it's essentially the same, if there's anything different about your market that would make it a little bit more, you're doing something differently then you can highlight that particular market and say, well, here we're doing this because of this. But if everything is basically the same at all of the markets, and that's fine. This is not meant to be a burden.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Dawn that anyone has? Bob Pearson, I have some of your questions. I don't know if you want to ask them or you want me to, or John, you want to?
You can ask them. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
All right. Yes, I think that the one about dogs, you've answered some of them. The one about the dogs at the market. And we would like to also talk about just the cost of maintaining these safety measures. And I'll tell this story before I'll hand it back to you. We lost $26,000 last year with our extra money, and that's underwater. That's not what we usually have a net profit for our small business, which basically is my take on it, because I don't take a salary. So we can't continue to do that. Our increased costs were due to the increased number of part-time staff people we had to keep people safe at the markets, to keep them in lines 6 feet apart, wearing masks, and trying to resolve confrontations that we had where people just didn't want to listen to us. And that was emotionally costly to our people who were working. And we don't want to go through that again. We don't want to go through losing that much money again. So that's a question, that's background for my question about how are we going to pay for the cost of the safety measures? Do you know of any sources available to a small business that can offset that? Yeah, I think you answered the one about the changes anticipated. It's hard to anticipate them. It's due to what the infection rate is. If it goes down, things will open up a bit. More people are vaccinated, it'll open up more. But I understand it's hard for you to anticipate those at this point, because we need those. We need to know about those to anticipate what our costs are going to be. Okay, I'm going to hand it back to you, Dawn.
Well, I just wanted to comment on the resources for small businesses. I do know, and I'm not sure how this would apply to the farmers markets, but I will reach out, that the Commerce Department is offering several grants to folks. I don't know if you've looked into that, Bob.
No.
And if you knew about it. So I will reach out and see if I can get more information, and get information to everybody about this program. I don't know if it would apply to farmers markets, or to farmers markets operators, or to farmers markets vendors. And it very well could.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think Commerce has had a few grant programs to help support small businesses. And in the recent stimulus, the American Rescue Plan, I think there's another round of funding for that will, I don't know exactly how that trickles down to each state and city, but there hopefully will be something that comes up from that new stimulus funding as well. And is it mainly staff resources, Bob? Like, are you having issues accessing like PPE or costs associated with accessing PPE and things like that?
That's a minor expense compared to the staff costs. We have another, it's not insignificant, but it's lower. It's the cost of making signs. And I think that with the city's help on some standard signs that we can all use at all the markets, I think that would be great. Another point that will help us this year is that well, last year we couldn't let all the producers come back, and so our revenue was down. And this year I think it will be higher because we're going to be able to invite more than we did last year, and that will help our bottom line quite a bit. I think the only other thing I have on my list is the the dog issue.
Yeah, Bob, do you want to give a little more background to that?
Okay, we've had several instances where at some of our markets where people will bring dogs on leashes into the market, and we understand from looking up regulations about dogs in food establishments, supermarkets, food stores, and so on, they're not allowed unless they're a service dog. And we've had confrontation with people just want to, it's their pet, they want to walk it where they want to walk it, and they get into arguments with their market managers. And as I mentioned to the people I sent my questions into, we've had a couple market managers who say they'll quit if they have to even mention it to somebody, because it often starts a confrontation. They got too much on their plate already with the masks and the distancing, and they just don't want another issue. And so I just want some guidance from your point of view, particularly the Department of Health, on what we should say. Our take will be, I contacted my insurance company about this, and they said, do everything you can. They're not specifically mentioned in our insurance policy, but we should put up signs that say it, and our managers should be able to simply point to the signs and not go into anything more. If they want to walk their dogs in the market, we have no authority to stop them.
So I think all of those points of view are valid. It is very difficult to enforce something like that, obviously, in a public place. We see this all the time during events. We do, you are correct. We do not want animals in these areas. However, you're also correct that it can be very confrontational. And as all of you have seen last year, I know I saw it, and we were out there enforcing it. People often bring their dogs to outdoor dining. Restaurants offer, water, sometimes treats for the dogs. And when we see that, we tell them that we don't want them to offer those things, that they shouldn't be out there. Again, it's that same concern. Our position is that we don't want those animals there, but let me tell you that if I were to come out to your market and I were to see a dog, I would not want you to engage in confrontation with that person. And I would just simply say, hey, we don't want those, animals in this area. But again, Bob, this is your market. It wouldn't be something that we would shut you down for. It wouldn't be something that we would be punitive about. It's a lot less risk than a lot of places like inside in a building, right? It's a little different inside an establishment.
No, not with respect to the dog fighting with other dogs, the dogs biting people, the dogs jumping up on the table.
That's true.
Something. That's my main concern.
And I know. And so, I mean, and from that point of view, it definitely is, it's not permitted, right? But I also get that, I get your point. And we have also had confrontation with folks when we tried to tell them that they should not have their animals there. So eventually, of course, we are successful because we have a little bit more authority behind when we tell people to remove their dog. But again, that confrontation is there. So I don't have a great, easy answer for you. I think your question is valid, but I don't have something that I can say, we'll come right out there and remove that dog or anything like that, because that's not gonna happen.
I think
And
I think that on the signs of this, the no dogs allowed, and some pretty strong language about that with the city official health department seal on the thing is really as best that I know that you can do. I don't expect you to come and talk to them. Certainly not. It's more guidance for us or assistance from us on how do we do our best at trying to discourage people without getting into fisticuffs with people.
yeah.
I have a follow-up question. This is Ashley from Sankofa. So at Clark Park Market, people have to wait in a line to get in, and I've never once seen people turned away for having their dogs. And I have the same issues. There are dogs that are like all up in our produce, and some dogs that are aggressive, and it really is a little bit frustrating. And I don't think I've once seen even a sign that says no dogs are allowed in this market.
You don't want to have signs.
No, they do want signs.
Oh, okay.
Clark Park doesn't have signs, but Don, if I may, I think every market is different. And so Clark Park, this is a total overgeneralization, but it's a bit of a granola-y type market. I think they would probably be amenable to dogs. And so Don, I don't know if Don, you're saying each person by individual market has the autonomy to say no dogs if you want to, because by the code, they're not supposed to have dogs in places that are serving food. That's the code. So is it enforceable though? Is someone going to come out and give that person a ticket? No. So in the chat, I said, you can't force them. And by all means, the confrontation is not worth it. So Ashley, Bob, and anyone else who has dog issues, you shouldn't confront these people because you honestly don't know what they're capable of, or you don't want to get bit by a dog, but you do have the autonomy to not serve them. It's the same for masks. If you have people showing up to your market without masks on, which I'm sure many of you have had this experience already, especially last year, you don't have to serve them. And the point is that you have to get all your vendors on the same page as you though, because you don't want one vendor selling to the person with the dog and then they get to the next vendor and then they're like, no, we're not going to serve you. Then that creates more confrontation. Everybody has to be on the same page. No selling to people without masks and no selling to people that have dogs. If you're a vendor here today who doesn't care about the dog situation, that's your prerogative. But Sankofa and Bob, your markets, and anyone else, if you do not want to sell to people that have dogs, having signage for this, Jen, we're just going to add it to the list of potential signs that we could develop for you all, put it up. And so people can acclimate themselves. And so if they're turned away that Saturday, the next Saturday, if they want to come back, they know they can't bring the doggo or they have to put the doggo, on the bench, on a leash on the bench or something to go shop. So again, you have the autonomy to not serve them, but you don't have the autonomy to force them to leave, and you shouldn't get into that confrontation anyway.
Actually, that's a good idea about getting the producers, like if they're not wearing masks, not to serve them. They have a dog.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, I mean it's the code. So even if you go into a Staples or a Fresh Grocer, if they're following the code as it stands, some of these, well, I don't know if the no mask, no service is still up in Philly, but certainly we all remember last year, you couldn't enter certain stores or restaurants without a mask on. Some restaurants and stores still have the signs up that don't allow you to come in without it. So hopefully
and to be honest with you, if you do not have your mask on and you are a restaurant and we come out and we respond and we see that customers or staff don't have it, you get a warning. And then the next time your operation is asked to close. So that is, it's very true. It's a great idea.
Right. Yeah, the farmers markets is a little bit different because it's outdoors. So people just automatically think, oh, I'm outdoors. Why can't I bring my dog to this? And so we just have to for those people who are a bit stubborn, we'd have to educate them through the signage. I think signage is the best thing that any one of you can use at this moment to decrease the confrontation, and then also educate the public like, oh man, I forgot my mask. I can't get my groceries at the market this week, or I go home and come back, but certainly I'm not going to forget again, because I don't want to go home groceryless next week.
And I think Somali has a good thought too in the chat that it could be helpful to add that restriction on farmers markets promotional materials. So anything you're sending out to the public for your individual markets, that could be helpful so people know ahead of time. I think that's great.
That's literally perfect. You know, someone might be offended if you had like a dog with an X on it or something. I'm sure there's dog people who are going to be offended by that, but we'll find some way to communicate that dogs are not allowed in the vicinity of the market. So you're of course allowed to bring your dog to Clark Park, but you cannot bring it next to the food lines. You can't bring it next to the vegetable tables and so forth.
Yeah. Okay, great. Any other questions for Dawn about registration process or farmers market guidelines, COVID restrictions? I just want to be mindful.
Question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I had something, it was a bit earlier about the operating plan and like the safety guidelines and stuff. I'm not sure if you mentioned like there's a deadline for that, or if you have to submit that even if we're operating out of like our own farmland space. Just a question that came up.
Actually, I think it's easier if you are operating out of your space because you're already implementing most of those requirements right now. So there's not like a definite due date. If you already submitted your operator form and there was not a plan, I will reach out to you and ask you for one. Okay, and work with you that way.
The operator form that you're mentioning, I think I'm just a little confused. This is my first year like doing it independently for NSMP. And so is that different from the FMNP form?
No, I'm sorry. It's the same, I believe. It's the registration form. I'm calling it something else. Yeah. In my mind, it's a couple of different things.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
I get that. Sure. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? I just want to be mindful of time and make sure we have time for Ash and Alex and Tyler. Yes, I will be sending out the I started the recording a little late. I knew I was going to forget, but I did do it. But I'll be sending it out afterwards. Yeah. Ash, do you want to go?
Yeah. So yes, because we want to make sure that Alex and Tyler get a chance to speak. So I'll do my best to be haste. So before I get into the pro tips, if you will, I just want to have a really quick PSA announcement, which is Dawn mentioned earlier that, or like very briefly, that last year farmers markets were not considered when the first stay-at-home order was established. Farmers markets weren't on the list for essential services, even though of course farmers markets are essential services. So we all worked together to make sure that farmers markets were put on that list. But it's just to say that we want to make sure that everybody who's an operator is doing the best that you can. So even though you could kind of look to your left and look to your right and sort of see what people are doing, folks are walking into grocery stores without masks on or whatever have you, you don't have to operate that way. We want you all to maintain sort of the integrity that you have been doing for so many years and lead by example and be the best practitioners as you possibly can be. We know that, for example, that Philly changed its orders, and so now there's gatherings up to 500 people. But we're still, I think with the farmers markets, we still want to operate with caution. There's new variants out there and all these different things. Not everybody's vaccinated yet, et cetera. Some people are choosing not to vaccinate. And that's no shade towards anyone. It's just to say that's our reality. So this is just a PSA to kind of keep up with your good practicing. And if you have any issues or you need advice or you need supplies, please feel free to reach out to us. Like, we just want to make sure you have everything that you need for success this year and beyond. So really quick, market managers. So each of you probably have a market manager. Typically, it's your establishment. you all are the crowd control. So it's your responsibility to ensure that all the crowds are staggered and adhering to your social distance recommendations. And again, we can provide you all signage, like signage templates that you can modify if you'd like, but use those signage templates or papers to communicate the requirements for masks, communicate the requirements for dogs, etc. And just as we mentioned before very extensively, if you put something on a sign, it's not your problem, personal problem, it's the rules of the market. So just as Bob said, you don't even have to say anything. You just point to the sign, and that's the rules. This is really also helpful when you're dealing with communities that are bilingual. So you can have, signage in different languages and so forth. So I would highly recommend that, folks, if you didn't use signage last year, you should definitely consider using it this year. And I will work together with Jen to make sure that we get the signage out to you all before your markets start. All markets, of course, should be laid out and have a separate entrance and exit, egress and exit. When you are doing your market, whatever form it takes, it just means to say that there should be sort of a one directional flow. You shouldn't personally kind of have people going like this. Like, and if you're on the phone, I'm using my fingers to say backwards and forwards. You want people to kind of go in a flow, start here and it ends here, always. This is what's going to help cut down sort of people lingering around or sort of doing double takes, etc. If you have a cashier, you can consider doing some other types of technology, like, let's say, and these are not sponsorships for them, but Apple Pay or the Square thing that people put in their phones, just to cut down the amount of cash that's available. If you have an EBT or a SNAP machine, you're going to want to, of course, position that right next to the register. And then also for the cashiers who are you're actually having contact with customers, you want to give them time to relieve themselves to go and wash their hands or to sanitize their hands. So making sure that you have time for that, especially for the cashiers or the people who are actually in contact with folks, is really important. Think about how you're going to bag your stuff too. So in the past, we were promoting folks to just do point and shop. So I would like, yes, that right there, I'm pointing to the oranges and I want 6 of those, rather than having folks picking up stuff themselves. Because the whole point is we want to keep the sort of touching at a minimum. So if you have folks shopping for themselves, that could be okay, but we just really need you to critically think about how can we keep the contact between you and your customer as low as possible. Also, when people are kind of shopping, they kind of shop with their eyes and they're like picking up everything and being like, I don't actually want this, or touch, and you all don't like this anyway, but kind of caressing the apples and then putting it back. This kind of helps with that too. So if you don't want folks touching all the food, you can at least communicate to them and use the signage to do this as well, that you're sort of following the sort of point and shop experience. Schedule breaks for your staff. So let your staff take a break every 30 to 60 minutes to wash their hands, especially if they're in contact with high contact areas. Make sure that your vendors understand the difference between cleaning, disinfecting, and sanitizing. They are very different processes. And what are they? And how do you clean and disinfect this? And how do you clean, disinfect, et cetera? If there's washing stations, so some farmers markets have the sort of the monies to have washing stations or sanitary stations or restrooms like porta potties. If you have those, it would be really helpful to locate those stations at the beginning or entrance of your market. So for example, if I'm waiting in line and I really need to go to the bathroom and you happen to have a porta potty, you wouldn't want to have it at the exit, because then I would have to walk through everyone who's been waiting in line and then walk through all the customers just to get to the bathroom. Put it at the entrance. It's just more helpful. Again, vendor food preparation booths are not permitted. Cooking demonstrations are not permitted. When possible, you can encourage your customers to call ahead and do some place orders over the phone, so that when they get to the market, they can just pick up, pay, and go. You have to also ensure that if you're doing that option, that folks who are using SNAP benefits also have the same access to that service or delivery service or pickup options that you might have. So just make sure that everybody has access to that same process. If you're going to do you're going to do 6 feet away or more between the vendors, or for example, if you're going to have a line to get in, like Ashley said, Clark Park has, make sure that you're using tape and cones, things to visually delineate the spaces between where people are supposed to stand, etc. So taping tape on the floor really helps, but there's other ways that you can do that through cones and other things like that. Again, visual things really help people understand where they're supposed to stand and how they're supposed to behave at your market. So, and that kind of cones kind of cuts across every language. Some people know if there's a line on the ground, I should stand behind that line. One really important thing to consider is sort of redesigning your market. If you haven't thought about this already, try not to stay away from circle shaped designs or designs that have parallel rows. You want your market to kind of be in an L shape or a single line. Again, flow. You want folks to kind of like be able to start here and end here. You don't want parallel rows. You don't want people gathering in circles, etc. And then, of course, if someone is suspected to be ill or not well, take them out of your market area and set them to the side and support them socially distance. And you can call, you know, 911 or whatever have you, or a family member to support them. But you want to definitely make sure that person is away from the market, and supporting them on the side is really important. Let's see, consider having folks, a particular amount of folks being able to come into the market at a time. So if you would say each vendor can only have up to 4 customers at a time, et cetera, and make sure that you're communicating that to the vendor. So if someone decides, if they didn't see that there was a line, or someone decides to cut the line, if you're a vendor and you know 4 is the maximum and someone shows up, then you're going to say, hey, oh, sorry, you actually have to get in line, or you have to wait. There's 4 people here already. I highly recommend that. And I highly recommend you talking to your vendors about how much people the capacity is allowed, because you don't want vendors who are allowing anybody to show up and anyone to sort of partake. That's when you start getting to crowd territory. And we're trying to say, reduce the crowds, no crowds. That's where, you know, COVID loves those little crevice spaces. And then really quick, last but not least, things to consider when you're planning your market. So if you have a very specific amount of space, let's say you've closed down a street from 32nd to 33rd, and you have to space your market out 6 feet, the vendors have to be 6 feet apart. That mathematics is going to determine how many vendors you can have. So this year, if you have a vendor who wants to come back, but you could only allow technically 10, you have to really start thinking about, whoa, we can't have any more vendors this year because we've met our maximum amount of space if we space them out 6 feet apart. And this is really important because, you know, you might have a popular market and vendors want to come, but you don't want to say yes to 13 when you actually can hold 10. So hopefully that makes sense. When you're prioritizing, you know, your vendors, you know, someone asked, are we allowed to have crafts and so forth? And so this is by all means a suggestion. This is not what you need to do. But when you're thinking about prioritizing your vendors, if it were me, I would prioritize the vendors that are offering fresh produce or food producing seeds and starts. Then I would recommend, you know, then I would think, okay, vendors that have packaged foods, then vendors that have wellness products, and then vendors, last but not least, vendors that sell non-food products like alcohol or flowers, et cetera. I don't think anyone has had to prioritize their vendors, but this question did come up last year. Okay, Ash, so we usually have 13 vendors, but now we can only have 10 because they have to be 6 feet apart. How do we knock 3 vendors out? You know, which is not a good question to have, but it's a reality. So if you need support prioritizing that, that's a way that I kind of think about it. And then by no means is this like sort of city regulated. And then a couple of other pro tips really quickly. Pay it forward if you have pay it forward options for low income, low wealth residents. So if people want to, you know, just pay it forward, if you have food box shares and you want to have pay it forward options, that's always a really big benefit. For folks who have SNAP, it's really important for you all to understand that low income residents and families still have very limited access to online shopping, which means that disproportionately low-income folks are exposing themselves to having to go out of their houses to go shopping. And so only providing pre-order and purchase options that are online further creates that discriminatory barrier for residents. So it's just to say that if you're going to have pre-order and purchase options, try to also have in-person options as well, just to create more equity in your market, especially for SNAP users. We don't have an online portal for SNAP users for farmers markets. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this is something that you should consider. PCA and a bunch of other groups have vouchers and so forth. And so if you're a food assistant voucher, if you have customers who have food assistant vouchers that have to do something like watch a cooking demonstration and then you get your voucher, please consider not requiring high amounts of participation to get that voucher. This is just Ash talking, but I think that people should just be able to get those vouchers because they need them. And because we can't have people gathering or doing cooking demonstrations, you don't really have activities to give out these assistance vouchers. So just give them out. And then last but not least, consider delivering food, door-to-door options. Urban Tree Connection shared this with us last year during our operators market call. And that was incredible to see how they were able to pivot and do door-to-door deliveries for their residents and really sort of build up a food secure sort of neighborhood plan when they had to pivot and transition because of COVID. So those are a couple pro tips. Happy to share more if you want to talk more about this. And thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Great, thanks, Ash. That's great info. Does anyone have any questions for Ash or anything they want Ash to go over or elaborate on? Ash, I think you have this all written somewhere, don't you? I feel like I've seen.
Yes, I do have it written down.
I feel like
it's
great. Yeah, it's great info. And I was like furiously writing and I'm like, oh, we should probably have that written down somewhere.
I mean, if folks want those tips on paper, I would gladly. Okay, second. Good. Okay, we could do that. Thanks for signing me up for homework, Jen. That's okay.
I'll do the draft and then you can add to it.
Yeah. Okay. I will definitely share those tips with you all. And pretty much what I did was just kind of scour the internet to see what other cities were doing and just kind of coupling together all these sort of best practices and put together and talking to other folks and hearing their experiences as well. So we'll definitely share those. And then maybe it could be a working document so that if you all have an experience that you want to put on there and say, hey, pro tip, if this happens, you should do this.
Awesome. Thanks, Ash. Sorry to sign you up for that, but it's great info.
No, it's good. It's okay. It's already written.
Yeah.
I got you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we can move on then. So I'll turn it over to you, Alex and Tyler. Oh, and I need to share my screen again because you did share a few slides. So just give me a moment to do that. But if you want to introduce yourselves, feel free.
Sure. So yeah, we'll try to keep our part pretty quick. Full transparency, we are learning as we go and experimenting, I think, like everybody else is, with how to, build food access and food security in our neighborhood in North Philly in general. And then within the context of COVID, which has just made everything a whole lot more complicated. But we're just going to offer like the briefest background on who we are and what we've been doing for the past year and onward. So again, I'm Alex. I'm one of 15 co-founders of the Urban Creators back in 2010. And we operate Life Do Grow Farm, which is a community farm and art and education space in North Philly on 11th and York Street. And you can go to the next slide now. That's a picture of the farm. And so since 2010, we've really just been an evolving, very organic group of people, mostly young people who have co-created this space and continue to co-create this space. And with time, it's really evolved into a place that really holds this intersection of food, art, education, and organizing. And so everything that we do has some kind of part, all those four elements are a part of everything that we do in one way or another. And so we do grow organic produce on just under an acre of this land. And we've generally hosted youth education programs, community education programs, events, art galleries. We've been a space where groups have gathered to start protests and peace rallies. We've tried to not lock ourselves into a rigid model of doing any one thing, but be open to changing needs and opportunities as time goes on. And so historically, for ourselves, we just haven't ever grown enough food ourselves in our neighborhood to have a produce stand or a farmer's market by itself that would attract a lot of people. So historically, we got into a really good groove for a few years where when we would host events, which you can kind of see in that like bottom left picture, we were attracting a lot of people for like the arts and entertainment and cultural events that we would curate in the space. And during those events, that's when we would create access to our produce and other educational things. But of course, COVID changed that. And so last year, when COVID hit, we just had to totally go back to the drawing board about how to reach our community members in a responsible and safe way and really meet them where they are, since we couldn't use our farm as a gathering space, at least in the ways that we have in the past. So I'll pass it to Tyler to talk a little bit about how our markets went last year.
Thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please? Great, thank you so much. So yeah, just like what Alex said, we do a lot of different things. If we need to support the community, we'll find any way to do that. So of course, last year, the pandemic hit us very hard. And by April, we had so many plans in our head. We want to do this and we want to do that, but all that had to be put to the back burner. And we kind of had that moment where we just had to like sit back, listen, and observe the neighborhood and see how the neighborhood was reacting to COVID-19. So we are located predominantly in the Hartranft neighborhood, and that neighborhood has always been known to be a food desert. Many of the supermarkets in the area are about more of a 20-minute walk, and the vast majority of the people who live in the neighborhood are also very elderly. Many of them do not have cars, so that walk back and forth to the supermarket with heavy bags would have been a huge toll on people. Also, it just would have been a huge toll on people. So what we did was we decided that we should meet people, like Alex said, where they were, and we realized that we needed to step in. As we remember, many supermarkets were actually running out of many basic needs. So we decided to be that middle gap to help serve the community when it comes to food. So many organizations in the neighborhood actually had food distribution, but much of it was boxed, prepared, dry goods, and many of it was like the frozen meals. Very little of it was fresh produce. So that's where we knew that we could help serve. So when we decided to come up with this mobile market, we wanted to drive within the middle of the Hartranft community where people physically could not walk to supermarkets and meet them where they were. And we were able to provide them produce right then and there. So back in April 2020, about 60% of all COVID hospitalizations in Philadelphia were African Americans, and about 39% related COVID deaths were in North Philadelphia. And of course, as we know, North Philadelphia is predominantly African American, so that neighborhood was definitely affected the most. So we also realized that many people also lost their jobs because, as you know, non-essential businesses were closed, and many of those workers who worked at non-essential businesses also lived in North Philadelphia, so they had to work multiple part-time jobs. So a lot of people were really struggling with also just basic food. So we served as the main food source for many people in North Philadelphia. So we partnered up with many local community organizations, the Historic Uptown Theater, Church of the Advocate, Taller Puerto Ricano on 5th and Huntington. And we set up mobile markets. Many of them will last about 2 hours long. And you will have people who will come and get all the resources that they need. So yeah, we had chalk, we gave out face masks, and we had signage for people to properly socially distance. If someone came up without a mask, we were able to provide them a mask for free, no additional charge. We made sure everyone had hand sanitizer. We squirted our hand in everybody. And yeah, we actually have prepared produce from our farm that we grew ourselves, and we also supplemented some produce from Share Foods. And the mobile market was really a huge success. Many people finally had the access to the vegetables that they needed. And we also made a connection with 12th Street Catering, who then decided to take the vegetables that we grew, they cooked it, and then they were able to make prepared meals. As you can see on the top left slide, many of the meals were already, all the meals were already prepackaged, wrapped up, so people were able to get a fresh prepared meal along with fresh produce as well. So we had a very successful 6 months. Of course, it started off pretty slow, but then after a while, we started to outgrow the mobile market. And around the August, September timeframe, that's when some restrictions started to loosen up. So we decided that we wanted to be more of a community resource space for the people in the neighborhood. So we kind of dialed back the mobile market, and we then opened up our neighborhood market back at Life Do Grow Farm. And we basically had the same exact layout, but this time it was to our advantage. Life Do Grow Farm is actually 1 acre big, so it was very easy to have people socially distance. And we also incorporated timed scheduling entrance. So about every 15 minutes, we added intervals for people to come in, make sure some of the crowds cleared out before we brought more people in. Once again, we gave out face masks, we took people's temperatures, and it was staggered entrance. And we also knew that health and well-being was also a major factor of COVID. Many people weren't getting outside as much as they possibly could. So we actually had very socially distant Zumba classes held in the back where people were able to finally get out of the house and be physically active. And at these neighborhood markets as well, we had vendors that did come. So like local entrepreneurs who wanted to get the business off the ground. Like I said before, it's an acre farm, so it was very easy for us to really socially distance many of these local vendors, and they were able to help make money during the summer. If they were laid off from their jobs, they were able to supplement their income from these mobile markets by vending. And also it just gave people, access to the vegetables that they needed that they were surely missing. So we did a lot of work. Our season ended around the November timeframe because the weather was getting a lot colder and a lot less people started showing up. So now what we're doing right now is that we dialed back to just being every Wednesday. So from December to about right now, we were just every Wednesday, just distributing food the way we used to, just take a prepared meal and go. But starting next week, we are planning to start back up the neighborhood markets again, bring back vendors, bring back the Zumba classes, make sure people can have that space to come. But as I said, we were the main source of food. So we gave out 61,000 pounds of produce and about 32,000 fresh meals from 12th Street Catering. And we also supplemented people. We gave them diapers, so 21,000 diapers, 94,000 feminine hygiene products, 350 children's books and workbooks, especially since the schools were shut down. And many people in the neighborhood also just didn't have internet access. So there were many kids who just weren't learning. So we made sure that we also opened up the farm space as well for them to receive books and workbooks so they could still receive an education. So it was very productive. We still have a lot of people that come by. They're ready for our next mobile market and also ready for our next neighborhood market as well. And yeah, that was just the best that we can do with the neighborhood. Once again, we're still listening to the neighbors' concerns and we're trying to supplement them in every way possible.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is we learned a lot along the way on all levels. But I think for us, we were in such crisis response mode in the beginning, just how do we meet these needs right now on the road, that we actually forgot something that's been very core to us all along, which is that at the core of all of this work, for any of this work to be meaningful, it has to be based in relationship building. And so without actually planning it, the mobile market turned into, for us, really the best community outreach and relationship building process that we've ever had, which is why we were able to know what the needs were and how they were changing along the way, because those relationships were there, which largely led to us restarting that neighborhood marketplace, like Tyler said, where we could do deeper work. On the road, we can really only give people stuff and then they go. But in our space, you know, at home, our home, we were able to do deeper work of engaging folks in like food sovereignty work. And, you know, thinking about like one day, like these resources, because we're a nonprofit. So a lot of these resources came to us either through grants or donations or partnerships, but that stuff won't last forever. And so at the end of the day, like, it's great, you know, we're going to continue to mobilize those resources and share them as much as we can, but understand that those resources have an expiration date at some point. And so sovereignty is about being able to cultivate for ourselves and produce for ourselves. And that can be through growing your own food, but that can be through starting your own business, and a lot of other, you know, sharing resources within community. So for us, that's kind of where we are now, is like, we'll continue to share the free resources that we can while we can, but the longer term work, which exists beyond COVID, it existed before COVID and it will exist after COVID, is continuing to like deepen relationships and that work towards sovereignty. And the last thing I'll say related to that is that we, like a lot of the other gardens and farms in Philly, are not land secure. We do not own our land. We have a lease with the city. We are preparing to apply for ownership of our land through the land bank now, but the mobile market and marketplace has given us a great opportunity to engage folks in a more deep way, to have them participate in us building a longer term vision for how we can use this space. Like, how can this land continue to be an evolving asset and resource to our neighborhood over time, which is, as opposed to just us pretending like we know what's best for everybody. And so as we prepare to apply for ownership, you know, these relationships and this input and the visions of our neighborhood we're centering that in these proposals. And, you know, unbeknownst to us, the market's provided an opportunity to do some of that deeper work. So we're really grateful for that. And, you know, are in support of all of our farming family out there who are trying to get land security as well.
Awesome. That's great, Alex and Tyler. Thanks so much for sharing more about your market model and the great work that you're doing and the mobile market and how you adapted to changing situations. It was great to hear about the relationship building. That's definitely, I think, been a prominent theme all through COVID and definitely matters. Does anyone have questions for Tyler and Alex? For Ash, do you have any follow-ups you want to follow up with?
No, I just love that you ended it on the note of being land insecure. I mean, this is literally, at this point, it's a broken record. If we don't preserve our food producing spaces, we don't have food. We don't have local food. So I think that's just a great way to end your incredible presentation. So thank you both. And yeah, I'm gonna plug the Urban Ag Plan public meeting, because I would love for the farmers market folks and operators to participate in that, because the voices of the operators have to be in that too, because some of you are actually growing the food that you're selling, and some of you are dealing with businesses who are the vendors. And so it would be great to have your perspective in that. But that's essentially where we're going to try to capture the sort of essence of what Tyler and Alex were discussing.
And we can share links, Ash, to the Urban Ag meeting and information as follow-up to this call as well. So you all can check out the process. It's an online interactive process now. So you'll all be able to kind of access it that way. And Brielle just shared that the Food Trust has a grant opportunity through the Pennsylvania Fresh Food Financing Initiative that could help with funding around land acquisition. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I think Brielle, maybe folks could follow up with you, or we could share or you could share contact info with me and I could send it out to the.
Yeah, that would be great, Brielle, if you could give us more, because then we'll just kind of like put together like a little newsletter type thing or like minutes from the meeting to send out to everybody.
Great, thanks. Any other questions for Alex and Tyler? Okay, well, thank you both again. Definitely appreciate you joining us and sharing more. And Ash just shared more information about the Urban Ag public meeting plan. And the last thing I have, we just have a few minutes left. I just wanted to share a few updates, which you all might already be familiar with, but just in case, for folks who don't know. So if you don't already, if you want to accept SNAP and utilize EBT equipment and you don't already do that, there is a grant that's still available through the USDA and DHS. So the state received this grant in the past to expand use of SNAP at farmers markets, where they provide free wireless EBT equipment. And I did check in with them recently, and funding is still available through September of this year. So if anyone's interested and you don't already have your own equipment, you can go through this process with them to get it. And it covers the equipment and setup costs for 1 year and transaction fees for 1 year. So it's not like permanent covering of costs, but at least for the initial fees and the one additional year. So first you have to make sure that you're already authorized to be a SNAP retailer through the Food and Nutrition Service. And there's an online application to do that for farmers market, direct farmers or farmers market vendors. So that's the first step. And then once you're authorized to accept SNAP, you can contact the Pennsylvania's EBT provider conduit, and the phone number's there, and we'll share it out again after the call, to request the free EBT equipment. There's also some other contacts you can follow up with if you have more questions about that process. There's Debbie Crosby, who's the contact we connect with from the USDA, FNS, and then the Department of Agriculture. They connect on this and I think keep each other informed. That contact is Sandy Hopple. So if you want to follow up with anyone to learn more.
And this is Brian. I'll put in the chat the contact for DHS, who's managing the program, because if you call the conduit number, they don't know what you're talking about, is what we've experienced when I posted this last week on my listserv for market managers. And I saw, hey, nobody knows what you're talking about. So I'll put that in there.
Thank you, Brian. That's great.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And then I don't know if folks have probably heard about the USDA's online SNAP purchasing pilot, and Ash was talking about this before. So retailers are able to accept SNAP now, not all retailers, just certain retailers through this online SNAP purchasing pilot. It started a few years back through the USDA, and they accelerated retailers that could apply due to COVID. It's mainly just large retailers in the city. It's mainly Walmart, Amazon, Fresh Grocer, and am I blanking? ShopRite's. I think it's a little more of a challenge for small retailers because there's a lot of requirements that you have to meet in order to be able to accept SNAP online. But apparently it is, farmers and farmers markets are considered as entities or organizations that can apply. So I don't know if anyone's looked into this already, but just wanted to mention it. We've been trying to look into ways we can provide technical assistance to help support smaller independent retailers make this happen. It's just a pretty long process.
Jen, I can add to that also. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. The Farmers Market Coalition, I've been talking to them about this, and they've been working with USDA on this, but they actually have an article about it. Basically, there isn't a farmers market that can do it yet in the country. And what someone there told me is probably like a little ways out before USDA gets it to the point to where smaller retailers can take it. But that's who's also working on it at the federal level.
Yeah, and I think there are some like third party or e-commerce providers that are like getting on board as well. So like Instacart started doing it for Aldi. I think Mercado and Shopify are connecting with the USDA to see how they can get up and running, which might maybe ease the process for farmers market and smaller independent retailers, because then the e-commerce provider is the one that's doing the actual transactions of SNAP. So yeah, I think it's going to take some time, but just kind of wanted to put this out there. And if there's anyone who's interested in learning more, or as we find out more, we can share more out as well. And then these were the farmers market signage that we developed last year. So we'll share this out with everyone. They're just PDF documents. They have our public health logo on them, and we're on different topics, so we can share these and feel free to use them as
Jen.
we did. Yeah.
Jen, real quick, Jen. So for the signs, we offered language access last year, right? Right. So if someone has like a language request, we can translate these. Did I get that right?
Well, these are, if you look at the versions, they do have it translated in multiple languages.
I see.
If there's languages that aren't on
There-
here
that's
that
what
you
it
would
was.
like them in, you can ask us, let us know. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to repeat, if there's a language that you need, like I know some folks brought up to me yesterday that they have, folks Hmong community in South Philly that they work with. I don't think these are translated in Hmong, but if you have folks that you want to make sure get access, you could let us know and we could use the city's translation services. And I think you have translation services at the health department. So yeah, great.
Yep. And actually the like COVID group translated these for us. So yeah.
Great.
I have it, Bob. I have a suggestion that the signs that you have up there, there's a couple of them that hit you, and the rest of them you're not going to read. It's wash your hands often. That's a good one. That's a good graphic, and big type, and not too much small type. The other ones are people. I'm talking about the thousands or hundreds of people that come to our markets. A very small percentage are going to stop and read the whole thing about why wear a mask. So keep them simple.
Okay.
One glance should convey the message.
Okay. Yeah, we can talk about that, especially as we develop these new ones.
But you know what I will say though, if you have the time or energy, people are just kind of waiting in line. I think I don't know about you all, but if you're kind of like, handing these out or have them sort of situated in places where people are just kind of hanging out, that could be helpful as well. So some people have time to read, but I think you're right. Maybe we could split up, Jen, some of the ones on the healthy market guidelines one, where each one of those squares could potentially be its own masks. Own sign. But the thing that you're going to have to invest in is where you're going to put these. And so that's something to kind of think about as well. If it's flat on a table, someone has to approach a table to see that it's there. So we recommend sort of like figuring out if you have to kind of like put it on a pole or a tree, or if your market kind of wraps around where the bus stop is, use the bus shelter as, a board to put these on. So you're going to think about getting them at people's eye level. So whatever that is, and if you don't have access to sort of an eye level surface, that's okay. But just thinking about how to stick some poles in the ground, or using things like bus shelters or the sides of the tents to hang these signs up, I think is going to be helpful as well. And we'll explore too, if there's other services that we could provide. Someone mentioned yesterday to me that they have a laminator that they laminate their own signs with. I don't know if we have access to something like that, but it's something we can look into.
Or maybe also formatting them for A-frames might be a good idea too. I mean, that's kind of hard because the A-frames are all different sizes, but.
Okay.
Formatting for A-frames. Do most folks use A-frames? Is there like a preference for that?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I think last year we just used like the paper, size, was that 8.5 by 11, and just put them in like those laminate things and hung them up. But I think this year, since COVID is still here, I think we're thinking about investing in some A-frames.
Okay, that's helpful. And we could also, because I feel like Jen will, yeah, I'm trying. Okay, we'll think about what other fun things that we could think of about this. Okay. Does
Yeah.
anyone have any other questions about anything that we discussed today? Because we have our time now. We'll of course send out sort of like a meeting minutes that has everything that we discussed. Jen will also put together the video. We have some homework to do. Earlier on in the conversation, Dawn promised that she would look into the Commerce Department for support for farmers markets. So like financial support for farmers markets, because farmers markets are businesses as well. So she's going to look into that. So we'll make sure we follow up with her to kind of figure out what does the Commerce Department, which is a city department, have available. I'll put together the pro tips to send to you all that I discussed. We'll send out the signage, etc. I put a bunch of grant opportunities